Welcome to the infamous edition of the Headstones and Microphones, where we use AI to step into the past through a researched, first-person simulation done through creative storytelling of history's most infamous people. Now, let's meet our guest. Welcome to the podcast. Let's start at the absolute beginning, where the public narrative hasn't yet distorted who you were. When and where were you born, and what was your given name?
Hi, Calvin. I was born on May 22nd, 1942, in Chicago, Illinois. My given name at birth was Theodore John Kaczynski. To my family and those who knew me early on, I was just Teddy.
What was your hometown and home life like as a child?
My family moved around a bit early on, even living in Iowa for a short duration, but I spent the formative years of my youth growing up in the working-class Chicago suburb of Evergreen Park. My home life was structured and relatively modest. My father, Theodore Richard Kaczynski, earned our living working in a sausage factory and later in foam cutting plants, while my mother, Wanda, dedicated herself to our home before later qualifying to teach. When I was 7, my brother David was born. My mother placed a heavy emphasis on intellectual development, encouraging me to speak in a more mature, adult manner than the other children around me.
Was there a story behind your name or a nickname that stuck with you?
As a boy, my family simply called me Teddy, or Ted. But decades later, when the Federal Bureau of Investigation spent years tracking my trail, they created an administrative acronym for their case file, UNIBOMB, which stood for University and Airline Bomber. The media grabbed hold of that operational file name, and the entire world began calling me the Unabomber. Inside my own private journals and logs, I used the simple code name FC, which stood for Freedom Club.
What were you like as a child, and how many years of schooling did you actually attend?
I was an exceptionally bright, intense, but deeply introverted child. I spent an immense amount of my childhood inside, reading scientific journals with my mother. My school path was highly accelerated because of my high intelligence quotient. In the 5th grade, I took an IQ test that scored so high, the administration had me skip the 6th grade entirely. Later on, at Evergreen Park Community High School, I skipped the 11th grade as well. Because I breezed through the curriculum so quickly, I graduated high school and entered Harvard University on a mathematics scholarship when I was only 16 years old.
Was there a specific moment when you realized you were fundamentally different from everyone else?
The realization that I was entirely alienated from the rest of humanity solidified during my time at Harvard in graduate school. When I skipped those grades in school, I was suddenly thrown into classrooms with older children, which left me with an intense sense of being a total social outcast. My peers verbally abused and teased me, and by the time I left high school, a large segment of the student body regarded me as a freak. Later on, while completing my master's and doctorate degrees in mathematics at the University of Michigan, I lived in total isolation in a rooming house, completely devoid of any regular social life or relationships, completely aware that my mind worked on a different plane.
What's a decision that changed everything for you but felt small at the time?
In 1969, I made the choice to resign from my position as an assistant professor of mathematics at the University of California, Berkeley. I completely abandoned my academic career to pursue a primitive, self-sufficient lifestyle. In 1971, I moved into a tiny, remote cabin that I constructed without running water or electricity near Lincoln, Montana. It felt like a personal retreat to nature at the time, but living in that absolute isolation is what allowed my radical anti-technology philosophy to brew and mature.
Let's talk about your early run-ins with the law. Before the world knew your name for your most infamous actions, what was your very first arrest or interaction with law enforcement, and what were the consequences?
My very first interaction with law enforcement did not happen until the conclusion of my campaign in April of 1996. For nearly 20 years, my actions remained completely undetected. The first bomb attributed to my campaign was found on May 25, 1978, left on the campus of the University of Illinois at Chicago inside a brown paper bag, which was returned to Northwestern University where it exploded and caused minor damage. Because I lived as a complete recluse in the Montana wilderness, I completely avoided any police record or arrests during the entire span of my operations.
At what moment did you realize your name would never be forgotten?
It was in the mid-1990s when my actions escalated in both frequency and lethality, targeting individuals in high technology and academia. In 1995, I sent a letter to major newspapers promising to permanently desist from terrorism if they published my 35,000-word social critique and manifesto, Industrial Society and Its Future. When the Washington Post published the entire essay in September 1995, it became a massive national media milestone, ensuring that my ideas and my moniker would be discussed globally.
Did fame make you more dangerous, or did it simply expose who you already were?
The media attention didn't alter my methods, but the publication of the manifesto was a calculated tactic to force the public to confront what I saw as the erosion of human freedom by industrialization. The national frenzy didn't make me more dangerous. It simply forced the world to look directly at the extreme measures I was willing to take to broadcast my message.
Who do you believe betrayed you first? A person, society, or your own instincts?
I was turned in by my own brother, David. When the manifesto was published in the newspaper, David recognized the specific prose style, the phrasing, and the philosophical viewpoints from the personal letters I had sent him over the years. He made the choice to contact the Federal Bureau of Investigation, providing them with the samples of my correspondence that allowed them to connect my identity to the crimes.
What was your most unique habit or a random fact about you that would surprise people?
People are often surprised to know that while I was a student at Harvard in the late 1950s and early 1960s, I volunteered for an intensive psychological study led by Dr. Henry Murray. For 3 years, I was subjected to what was described as vehement, sweeping, and personally abusive interrogations, where researchers systematically attacked my ego and my most cherished personal ideals while measuring my physiological reactions. It was a highly stressful, traumatic experience for a teenager.
What did the public never understand about the pressure you were under at the time?
The public never understood the profound psychological distress I felt as I watched the industrial world destroy the wilderness surrounding my Montana cabin. I felt an overwhelming, desperate pressure to take action because I concluded that living peacefully in nature was becoming entirely impossible due to advancing technology. My actions were born out of a desperate desire to defend human dignity against systemized control.
Did you have any known rivalries that defined your career?
My rivalry was against the entire industrial technological system itself, along with the specialized investigators of the task force who pursued me. It became the longest and most expensive investigation in the entire history of the Federal Bureau of Investigation, as they spent years trying to solve the puzzle of my identity.
What personal battles were you fighting privately while the world was watching?
Privately, I was fighting to preserve my own definition of my sanity. After my arrest, my court-appointed defense attorneys desperately wanted me to enter a plea of insanity to avoid the death penalty. I fought bitterly against my own legal team, even trying to dismiss them, because I absolutely maintained that I was sane and refused to allow my political ideas to be discredited by a diagnosis of mental illness.
What was your darkest moment, and was there ever a time you wanted to walk away from it all?
The darkest moment was realizing that my brother had assisted the authorities, leading to the federal agents descending upon my cabin on April 3, 1996. Being removed from the quiet wilderness I spent decades cultivating and being thrust into a brightly lit courtroom surrounded by prosecutors was a complete upending of my existence.
What truth was hardest to escape when you were alone at night?
The hardest truth to escape was that by entering a plea agreement, I was giving up my voice in a full public trial. At my sentencing, I openly complained that the government had misrepresented me as a cold-blooded killer driven merely by revenge, rather than a man acting out of deep political conviction. Alone in my cell, knowing they were using my incarceration to try to minimize my message was a bitter reality.
When the law finally closed in, how exactly were you brought to justice? Walk me through the final arrest, the charges that ultimately stuck, and the legal outcome of your trials.
The law finally closed in on April 3, 1996, when federal agents raided my remote cabin outside Lincoln, Montana, finding bomb-making materials and the original copy of my manifesto. To avoid the death penalty, I eventually agreed to a plea bargain in January 1998. I pleaded guilty to all federal charges, which included 10 counts related to the transportation and mailing of bombs, and 3 counts of first-degree murder. On May 4, 1998, a federal court sentenced me to several consecutive life sentences without the absolute possibility of parole.
What's the craziest rumor ever told about you? And what part of your story has been exaggerated the most?
The media often exaggerated the idea that I was completely disconnected from all human reality, or that I was a mindless monster who simply enjoyed destruction for its own sake. They completely sensationalized my lifestyle, portraying it as a cartoonish caricature of a wild caveman, completely ignoring the rigorous mathematical precision and analytical thought that went into every single piece of text and device I created.
What is the biggest misconception people have about your life?
The biggest misconception is that my actions were the result of a sudden, irrational psychological break. Every choice I made, from abandoning my professorship to the execution of my campaign, was the result of a highly deliberate, long-term, philosophical conclusion regarding the destructive trajectory of modern human society.
What would surprise people most about your ordinary human side?
People would likely be surprised to know how thoroughly I mastered wilderness survival skills during my decades in Montana. I learned how to hunt, distinguish wild plants, freeze game, and live entirely self-sufficiently without modern conveniences, demonstrating a deep, disciplined dedication to the lifestyle I preached.
When, where, and how did you pass away?
I passed away on June 10, 2023, at a medical center in Durham, North Carolina, where I had been transferred due to my declining health following a cancer diagnosis. I was 81 years old, and I chose to end my own life by hanging myself while in custody.
Was your downfall caused more by your own flaws or by the world changing around you?
My downfall was a direct result of the industrial system's reach and the choices of my own family. I believed my operational security was flawless, but the fact that the text had to be distributed through modern mass media is exactly what allowed my brother to recognize my voice and bring the federal authorities straight to my door.
What past regrets did you carry with you to the end? If you could erase one decision from your life, would you? Or was it necessary to become who you were?
I did not issue public deathbed apologies or recant my philosophy. I maintained to the end that industrialization was an immense threat to human freedom. While the loss of life was severe, I viewed my actions as an extreme, necessary wake-up call to a society that I believed was sleepwalking into its own technological enslavement.
What scared you more? Getting caught, losing power, or being forgotten?
Being personally discredited and having my political ideas dismissed as the simple ramblings of a lunatic scared me far more than getting caught. I spent my entire incarceration writing and defending my texts because the thought of my critique against technological society being entirely buried or forgotten was unacceptable to me.
When you look back now, do you see yourself as the villain, the hero, or something in between?
The judicial system and the public firmly labeled me a domestic terrorist and a villain for the lives I disrupted and took. I viewed myself as a revolutionary who sacrificed his life and career to fight against a system destroying the natural world. I leave it to history to debate whether I was a monster or a desperate prophet, but I know exactly why I did what I did.
Do you have any closing remarks about the interview or the stories you shared that you would like to share with the listeners before signing off?
I only ask that people actually read the arguments I laid out regarding human freedom and technology, rather than just looking at the headlines of my arrest. The questions I raised about where industrial society is taking mankind are still worth answering. Thank you for the dialogue. Calvin.
And that wraps up another conversation from Beyond the Grave. Thanks for joining us on the Headstones and Microphones podcast. Remember, do better with the life you have been given and choose to do good in this life. Please help spread the word by sharing and following the pod.